From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Midler, and this matters. There's an old saying, if you fail to plan, plan to fail. In this province, there is a rigorous approval and public consultation process for development projects. But that process has recently been upended by a tool that has been described as the bulldozer of planning, that can quickly give approval to contentious plans and currently has no appeal process. It's supposed to be used as a method of last resort, but now the Ontario provincial government is ramping up the use of ministers' zoning orders. And as a result, while municipalities and developers seem to have found a way to cut red tape, many are waving a red flag at a tool that could potentially reshape how things are built in Toronto and all across the province. Noor Javed is a reporter for The Star covering suburban municipal politics and education. Jennifer Pagliaro is a City Hall reporter with The Star. They have both been following the story and join us to explain more. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So guys, for years, it's the OMB that was cast as the villain in development plans here, and they often approved things that communities didn't particularly want. But now there is a new big bad. What exactly are ministers' zoning orders, aka MZOs?
So an MZO is basically a planning tool that gives the Minister of Municipal Affairs extraordinary powers to override the local planning process. And in that, he can bypass any environmental policies, any local planning policies, and he also completely eliminates public participation. And he can redesignate the land however he wants. So he can make it employment, he can make it commercial, he can make it residential. And the big thing about minister zoning orders, which I think is shocking to everybody, is that there's no appeal process. So once an order has been issued, that's it. And the local councils have to follow it. And, before, it was never used. It was considered a planning tool of last resort. But we're seeing now that they're coming fast and furious.
That is the thing. These have been around for a while. And you say it's been used as a tool of last resort. With this government, things have changed. How and why?
Yeah, I think Noor actually looked at the last 5 years early on when we started realizing that this government seemed to be issuing more than normal. That was sort of anecdotal. But then in the numbers that the ministry provided, you can see that the previous Liberal government only issued 2 of these orders in 2016 and 2017 before Doug Ford's government took office. And since then, Doug Ford's government has issued now close to 30, it might be more than 30 now with the recent orders that we just saw in Toronto. So there's a really huge difference in the frequency of how often this government is using them. In terms of why, that's a really big question that I think Noor and I and others at The Star are actively looking into. And it's certainly a question that local councils have and residents in these communities.
And when you ask the government officials, why are you using this? They'll say their major reason is that this is a tool that is basically expediting development. It's cutting all the red tape. And, their line is that this is something that's going to build, more jobs and more infrastructure. And so I think the big thing for them is that they want to see development happen. They'll say it's because of the recovery, to help the economy. But the big thing that it does is it does cut red tape. It basically eliminates the long planning process, which can take a few years.
I definitely want to get into that, but I want to talk about some of the examples and the number of projects in and outside the city where these things have already been used. I know you guys have talked to some residents. Noor, you talked to some people in Simcoe County who were fighting a development process. What happened there?
So the thing about MZOs is that every time I hear about one, I find that they're all quite unique. So the one in Simcoe was very unique because it basically involved a situation where there was these residents that were fighting a waste management site in the middle of a forest. They've been fighting it for years, and they finally got the matter to a local planning appeal tribunal, or LPAT, and they were going to basically argue that we don't want to have a waste management site in the middle of the forest. But at the same time, Simcoe County got worried because there was a lot of delays to the project. And so they actually asked the province to issue an MZO on the matter to end it. And then when the residents group found out about that, they were quite upset that the province could potentially issue an MZO during an LPAT hearing. And for people who might know, LPAT hearing is like really the last resort that residents really have to, speak up and appeal planning issues. So they were just concerned that could it be possible that the province would say yes to this MZO. The last I heard, the MZO has not been issued there, but it's just another example of the way the MZOs are kind of instilling fear in people because they don't know if they'll be passed, if there'll be one issued. It's kind of like a big no man's land, and it's really in the hands of the province.
Jen, what recently happened in Toronto on the West Don Lands?
So this week we found out about 3 MZOs that were issued in this one part of the city. West Don Lands, which includes places that we now call Canary District, is like the east side of downtown, kind of in the elbow of where the DVP meets the Gardner. And there's a lot of provincial land there. It was previously used as a Pan Am Games site, and it's slowly being redeveloped. And each order is for 3 different sites, and it's sort of baffled all of the local planning and city officials that I've spoken to because those sites are all at different stages in the development process as it was. There was one site that was actually meant to be approved by council this week in a meeting that's still ongoing. And so that sort of overruled that process and has allowed that development to go ahead, as Noor explained, without any of this regular process. The second site was very early on in the process. A developer had applied to build a series of buildings, and that was still in the early stages of being reviewed by planning staff and was essentially approved as applied for. And the last site, which is the most confusing to planning officials, is a heritage site. It's an old foundries building, and it has no application that anyone at the city that I spoke to knows about, but it is now approved for a condo tower at almost 50 stories without any community consultation or any proposal being even put in front of city planning staff or the community. And so that has led to, a lot of discussion at the city about sort of ongoing provincial meddling when, there's a site where there isn't even a plan proposed, but now there's already an approval in place.
The argument there is that they want to ensure that there's more affordable housing, right? That's what's being sort of said as the reasoning.
Yeah, as Noor said, like each of these orders is kind of unique. I think there's like not a similar situation. Like what we're talking about in West Don Lands is totally different from what Noor was just describing in Simcoe and the situation there. And in this case, they're saying the same things that Noor explained about, cutting red tape and all of this, but they've added this layer of, well, we're going to build, 1,000 units of affordable housing. And, the issue there is that the orders themselves don't actually guarantee any affordable housing. It's not written anywhere in the order that there has to be a certain amount. These pieces of land in West Don Lands are owned by the province. So the only way to guarantee affordable housing is for the province to make sort of external agreements with developers that guarantee a certain number of units. And like I said, for that one site, there isn't even a proposal in place. So I think it's a bit premature to guarantee a certain number of units when they haven't actually really secured those units as of yet. And so that's something that we're watching for.
Okay, those are 2 of the big ones. Are there any, I said there's about 30, are there any other ones that sort of stand out to you?
They're all different, and it's hard to gauge, which one is really concerning. The ones obviously that we've pointed out are quite concerning, and then there's a few others that are currently happening in the works or very close to being MZOs that people are concerned in terms of the environment. I think the big thing that I'm always surprised about is that they really, no matter what they are, like if a municipality has not asked themselves for the MZO, which we're going to get to later, in most cases, the ones that are being issued completely override what in most cases, the municipality even wants happening. So for example, there was the case basically where the province gave an MZO for this like huge housing development in Peel region to build, a few thousand homes and stuff. And it had been very contentious. Like this development had not been approved by the region of Peel. It had not been approved by, I think, 2 of the bodies up there. And so the province came in and said, okay, fine, go ahead, build these houses. And so I think it's important to realize that often the local city does not want the MZO there. And on the other hand, there are many cases we're seeing now where it is the municipality that's asking for an MZO. So recently, for example, I think in Bolton and Caledon, the council wants an MZO for land around a GO station. So we're seeing kind of just lots of different types of MZOs. And now it's like both the developers and the councils are just saying, okay, you know what, this is another tool. Let's just try to get as much approval as we can. That's what it seems like when you look at what's going on. So those are just some examples of the way that the MZOs are being used.
There were also 2 requests to use an MZO in the Greenbelt, right?
Yeah. I guess when there was this big flurry of activity around the MZOs, a lot of the councils, especially in York region, that have a lot of their land in the Greenbelt, thought, okay, you know what, if everyone's asking for an MZO, why don't we try to get some of our land out of the Greenbelt? And so Richmond Hill, the council of Richmond Hill passed a local resolution locally to see if they could get some land near one of their GO stations removed from the Greenbelt and used for industrial uses. And then Stouffville also wanted to get some land that's in the Greenbelt that was along the 404 out of the Greenbelt and used for employment. But the one thing that the province has said is that we're not going to touch the Greenbelt. So it doesn't matter if you ask us, as long as it's in the Greenbelt, we're not going to touch it.
We'll be right back. I think we should also be very clear. The minister we're talking about is Steve Clark, the Minister of Municipal Affairs. And here's the thing. This is a black box, right? He doesn't actually have to do any further research into issuing these, right?
No.
Yeah, I mean, they have full control over the planning process. We get our planning tools essentially from the province. And so in the example of Toronto, they issued these 3 West Donland MZOs that I just talked about, and they posted them up as they get listed as regulations under the Planning Act, which is kind of the umbrella piece of provincial legislation that governs a lot of this stuff. And the city planner that was responsible for this part of the West Don lands was doing research on the Planning Act as part of something else he was working on, and just happened to notice that they had issued 3 zoning orders. Like, the province didn't even tell the city that they had done this. So I think that kind of gives you some insight into the amount of power they have here.
But I think it's quite important to say that one of the things that the minister is saying now is that, well, we're not going to issue it unless the municipality has already approved it. What happened in Toronto is very unique. But in the suburbs of the 905, basically what they're saying is that we're not the first ones approving it. Basically, it has to go through a local council first. And so a lot of councils are now being inundated with MZO requests from developers, because developers are now realizing that why should we waste, hundreds of thousands of dollars in years of red tape? Why should we even take our plan to the public if we don't have to? And so, councils across the GTA are now getting developers who are just coming in the last minute with like an MZO request, and really putting councils on the spot about what should we do? Do we just approve all of them? Or because, we're not making the final decision, or should we, make up some random process so the public gets involved? So it's really upturned the entire planning process. It's really turned it over. Councils that have generally been development friendly are even really nervous about what's going on, because, as one councillor told me recently, it really is taking the councillor, the municipal politician, out of the picture. Because a lot of what they do is that they help with the planning and they help develop and create communities. And if you have Big Brother kind of doing that for you, then it really, takes the public and really the local politician out of it.
I was going to ask you what this means for the planning process, but I'm going to take this further. This is one of those things that if this is looked at as a tool, what would be the political will to get rid of this? I mean, this is basically one of these things that they would be like, oh, we're not going to use this or get over power, right? It just seemed like such a quick cutting through of the planning process as we know it. And so does it just invalidate completely?
From what I'm seeing, it basically just takes away all of the years that have been spent in making up policies and community plans. Yeah, it basically upturns and turns, it doesn't, it takes away all of the need for any kind of planning process.
If you look at the West Don Lands site, like look at the one that has a heritage building on it, there are all these planning principles and policies in place about protecting heritage buildings. There's nothing in that order about that heritage building. So that completely rips up all of that long-standing work. But on top of that, you have to think about what the city planning process is for. It's a city planner's job to think about a building in the context of the entire community. And that's just not, like if the local residents want to live next to a condo building, that's like whether or not there's enough sewer capacity to accommodate a 50-story building at that site. Or if building a 50-story building there will create a wind tunnel for the rest of the community. Or if there needs to be additional public streets in order to accommodate the residents who will be added to that community and coming out of parking garages and stuff like that. So the orders eliminate all of those questions and queries and asks that the city planning process makes of developers.
We've said it already, but governments seem to love these because it's all about cutting red tape, which is music to Doug Ford's ears. He recently said he wants to use more of these MZOs, so it seems like they're just getting started, right?
Yeah. I mean, he said recently that he specifically told Minister Clark that he wants to see more of them. And he specifically said that he wants to see things sort of approved without having to go through the regular process, including, some of the stuff I talked about and environmental assessments, which are really key in some of the areas Noor talked about.
You guys already said this, but I just want to confirm. Is there any way to fight or overturn these?
No, from what I have been reading and researching and talking to people, there is really no way, nothing you can really do once an order has been issued. The only thing I guess you can do is just watch it come to life.
And, city council yesterday, there was the West Don Land site that they were supposed to approve. And so now that that's sort of taken out of their hands, what they did approve at council yesterday is to sort of ask the developer nicely to still include some of these community benefits that they were supposed to agree to. And there's no real mechanism for that, right? Like you're just asking nicely.
And hoping for the best.
Exactly.
Well, guys, this is a really interesting and important story. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that our listeners should know about this?
There's actually two things I wanted to add. The first was that even though the province has said that they're not going to touch the greenbelt, anything outside of the greenbelt that is environmentally protected seems to be up for grabs. Just to people who care about, obviously provincially significant wetlands and lands, it seems like there have been many, many requests that are for building on top of provincially significant wetlands and properties. And some of them have been approved without any kind of environmental assessments or even public knowledge. And there's one that I'm actually currently looking at that is also on a very large, significant wetland. And it seems like there's really nothing that even environmental groups can really do, or even the TRCA in some cases. So if the province wants to build, it seems like it's going ahead. So I think that's really important for people to realize that although they're not touching the greenbelt, it seems like everything else is open territory. And the second thing is just that because councils don't know how to handle all these MZOs that are coming in, they're kind of making up their own rules as to how to get the public involved, because technically the public doesn't even know about it until it's already been issued. So some councils, for example, are having meetings where they're allowing the public to come and just discuss the MZO before that council will then approve it or not approve it. So I think that if you are a resident and you live in a municipality where you hear about MZOs or you look on the agenda and you see an MZO, I would suggest that you get involved, because I think that this is one of those things that the more people that are out there reading and listening about it, I think it will at least create more awareness and hopefully get people to at least challenge their politicians or local MPPs and ask them what's going on.
Yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to add, and I think Noor said that great, is that people might be more used to interacting with their local level of government on development files, but the province is still an elected government with representatives in the GTA. And so there's still a possibility to get involved and to try to pay attention to these new orders. And I know Noor has a really good story coming, and hopefully we'll have more on this overall soon.
Well, those are excellent points. Just to recap, this is a secret, powerful process with no appeals that is going to have ramifications across the province and how we live. That's an incredible thing. This is a great story. I really, really want to thank you for your time and for covering this.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having us.
Noor Javed is a reporter for The Star covering suburban municipal politics and education. Jennifer Pagliaro is a City Hall reporter with The Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Ranjan Budhar, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.